Here's what doesn't make sense about the Nancy Guthrie case. The person on her doorstep didn't know there was a doorbell camera, but a surveillance camera was found mounted on her roof. The ransom notes contained details only someone close to the case would know. But they were sent to TMZ, not the family. The suspect covered themselves head to toe to avoid leaving DNA, but couldn't figure out how to block a doorbell camera without ripping a bush out of the front yard. Every clue in this case contradicts another clue. And after spending days digging into every piece of available evidence, expert analysis, and law enforcement statement in this case, I can tell you this: 6 theories have emerged. And the most disturbing part isn't that one of them might be right. It's that more than one of them could be true at the same time. Let's get into it. Before we break down the theories, let me set the foundation for those of you just catching up. And even if you've been following this case closely, stay with me, because the details matter more than you think. Nancy Guthrie is 84 years old. She's the mother of 3 children, including NBC Today Show, a co-anchor Savannah Guthrie, one of the most recognizable faces on American television. Nancy has lived in the Catalina foothills area just north of Tucson, Arizona for decades. She moved there in the 1970s and raised her family in this quiet, spread-out desert community. She lived alone. She had mobility issues. The sheriff said she couldn't walk 50 yards by herself, but she was still sharp mentally. However, she relied on daily medication, and without it, authorities have said the situation could become fatal. On the evening of Friday, January 31st, Nancy went to her daughter Annie's house for dinner. It was about a 10-minute drive from her own home. They had a nice family evening, dinner, games, quality time. Then around 9:45 p.m., a family member drove Nancy back to her home. Her garage door opened at 9:48 p.m. and closed at 9:50 p.m. That data is confirmed. And then, silence. The next morning, February 1st, Nancy didn't show up for her virtual church service with a friend. She didn't answer calls. And around noon, she was reported missing. When authorities arrived at her home, they found blood on the front porch. It was later confirmed through DNA testing to be Nancy's. The Pima County Sheriff declared the home a crime scene. He stated that he believed Nancy had been taken from her residence against her will. Her cell phone was left behind. Her Apple Watch was still in the house, disconnected from her pacemaker in the early morning hours of February 1st. And the doorbell camera attached to her front door had been physically disconnected around 2 a.m. Now, for the first several days, investigators believed that footage was lost. Nancy didn't have an active subscription to the camera company, but the FBI worked with Google, which makes the Nest doorbell camera, and recovered what they called residual data from back-end systems. What they found changed everything. Grainy black and white footage showing a masked, armed individual on Nancy Guthrie's front doorstep, wearing a ski mask, wearing gloves, carrying what appears to be a handgun in a front holster, and wearing a black 25-liter Ozark Trail Hiker Pack backpack, a brand exclusive to Walmart. That footage was released publicly on February 10th. Within 24 hours, the Pima County Sheriff's Department received over 4,000 tips. As of today, they've received more than 18,000 total. The FBI doubled its reward to $100,000. Multiple ransom notes were sent to media outlets, not to the family, demanding millions in Bitcoin, with 2 deadlines that have both now passed. A man in Los Angeles was arrested for sending a fake ransom note. A delivery driver named Carlos was detained in Rio Rico, Arizona, about an hour south of Tucson, questioned for hours, and then released without charges after cooperating with investigators. And here we are. No suspect has been identified. No arrest has been made. Nancy Guthrie is still missing. So here's where it gets complicated. Because when you lay out all the evidence, 6 very different theories emerge. And they don't all point in the same direction. In fact, some of them directly contradict each other. Let's start with the one that multiple former FBI agents have put forward. The first theory is built around one simple question. If this was a planned kidnapping from the start, why did the suspect show up completely unprepared for a doorbell camera? Think about that for a second. You're planning to abduct someone from their home in the middle of the night. You cover yourself head to toe. You wear a ski mask. You wear gloves. You bring a weapon. You bring a backpack, presumably filled with tools or supplies. You take every precaution to prevent leaving behind a single strand of hair, a single fiber, a single fingerprint. But you get to the front door, and you don't know there's a camera there. That's the contradiction that launched this theory. And it didn't come from internet speculation. It came from seasoned investigators. Weaver Barkman spent 26 years as an investigator with the Pima County Sheriff's Department, the same department leading this case. When he looked at the FBI's footage, his analysis was blunt. The suspect, in his view, was dressed in a manner designed to minimize trace evidence. That's burglary tradecraft. That's how someone dresses when they're planning to enter a home, take what they want, and leave without anyone ever knowing they were there. That is not how someone typically prepares for a kidnapping, and he wasn't alone in that assessment. Several former FBI agents shared a similar view, that whoever entered Nancy's home that night may not have planned to take her at all. Former FBI agent Catherine Schwedt, who actually investigated a strikingly similar case back in 2003, where an 88-year-old grandmother was abducted from her Wisconsin home during what started as a different kind of crime. She said the footage raised serious questions about intent. The way she put it, this suspect clearly planned a crime, but the question is what crime they planned. Now, cybersecurity expert Morgan Wright added another layer to this. He looked at the footage and focused on the suspect's behavior with the camera. Why is this person putting vegetation over the lens? If you're coming to kidnap someone, you plan for cameras. You bring tape. You bring a can of spray paint. You don't improvise with a bush from the front yard. Wright's conclusion was that the suspect intended to enter the house and exit through the same point, the front door. That's a burglary pattern. And here's the detail that really supports this theory: the timing of the ransom notes. The first ransom note wasn't sent the night Nancy disappeared. It was sent the day after. If this had been a planned kidnapping for ransom from the beginning, the ransom communication would have been ready to go. The delay suggests the ransom itself was an improvisation, a reaction to the situation, not the reason for it. So the theory goes like this. Someone came to Nancy Guthrie's home intending to burglarize it. Maybe they knew about her connection to Savannah and assumed the house would be full of valuables. They covered themselves, brought a weapon for protection, and approached the front door in the early morning hours when they expected no one to be awake. But Nancy was there, and she woke up, or she was already awake, and the plan fell apart. Now here's where this theory runs into serious problems. If it was a burglary that went wrong, why take her? Nancy is 84 years old. She has mobility issues. She requires daily medication. Taking her out of that house is an enormous escalation. It turns a burglary into a kidnapping. It turns potential property crime into a potential capital offense. A panicking burglar doesn't do that. A panicking burglar runs. Catherine Schwedt herself raised this counter-argument. She asked the question directly. If this subject came to do a burglary and ran across Nancy, even if he drew his gun, why would he escalate into what could potentially be capital murder instead of just fleeing? If Nancy had been found deceased or injured inside the home, the burglary gone wrong theory would make more sense. But she wasn't in the home at all. Someone took her out. And that's the contradiction that leads us to the second theory, because there's a piece of evidence in this case that most channels haven't even talked about yet, and it suggests this wasn't improvised at all. Here's what very few people are discussing. In the days following Nancy's disappearance, FBI agents were seen on video scaling the roof of her home with a ladder. A female agent climbed up and removed a mounted wired device from the side of the building. Fox News footage also showed what appeared to be a small black solar panel near the device, also fixed to the roof. That device is believed to be a camera, and it was not her doorbell camera. Now, authorities have not publicly confirmed exactly what this device is. They haven't said whether it belonged to Nancy or whether it was placed there by someone else. But the discovery, and the way it was discovered, is significant. It was a neighbor named Laura Gargano who tipped off police. She noticed something in aerial footage of Nancy's home that bothered her. Nancy's flat roof was unusually clean. Gargano's own roof is flat, and she knew that after 3 weeks of rain in the Tucson area, any flat roof would normally be dirty. But Nancy's looked like it had been recently accessed or cleaned. She flagged it to investigators, and that's when they went up and found the camera. Security expert Dan Donovan, who runs a risk management firm called Stratoscope Holdings, called this discovery one of the most important clues in the entire case. And his reasoning is worth paying attention to. A camera on the roof, Donovan explained, suggests surveillance, planning, and situational awareness. That is not the behavior of someone improvising. It could mean they were watching entry points. It could mean they were watching police response patterns. It could mean they were monitoring the home to see who comes and goes, learning Nancy's schedule, learning when she's alone, learning when the house is dark. If that camera was placed there by the perpetrator, it means someone was watching Nancy Guthrie's home for days, maybe weeks. That's not a burglar who stumbled onto the wrong house at the wrong time. That's an operation. And Donovan went further. He warned that if the camera is connected to the ransom notes, if this was the work of someone demanding $6 million in Bitcoin, then the crime might be strategic rather than emotional. And in Donovan's experience, operational criminals who feel control slipping tend to follow through. But here's the problem with this theory, and it's a big one. If the suspect had a camera on the roof, if they had been monitoring the property, how did they not know about the doorbell camera? These are cheap, widely available devices. They're mounted at eye level, right next to the front door. Anyone who spent more than 5 minutes watching this house should have seen it. So either the roof camera and the person at the front door are connected to two different people, meaning this operation has layers that haven't been uncovered yet. Or one person planned the surveillance and a completely different, far less competent person was sent to execute the actual entry. And that possibility, that we might not be looking at one criminal mind, but two, is what takes us to theory number 3. This is the theory that, in my opinion, explains more of the contradictions in this case than any other. And it's built on a question that should be keeping investigators up at night. How can this case simultaneously show signs of sophisticated pre-planning and completely amateur execution? Because both are there, clearly, and they don't match. Let's lay out the amateur side first. The footage from the doorbell camera shows someone who, by every expert assessment I've reviewed, is not a seasoned criminal. Let me walk you through the details. First, the holster. The suspect is wearing a holster designed for a revolver, but the weapon they're carrying appears to be an automatic pistol. Those are different shapes, different sizes, different draw mechanics. Homicide investigator Chris McDana caught this immediately. His conclusion: this person does not have a lot of experience around guns. They grabbed a holster, probably from wherever they could find one, and shoved a different type of weapon into it. That's not someone who trains. That's not someone who's done this before. Second, the gloves. They're oversized, bulky, possibly multiple layers. Former FBI agent Leasing pointed this out. Those gloves would make it nearly impossible to get your finger into the trigger guard of that weapon. So the gun becomes a prop, a tool of intimidation, not utility. And that raises a question. Is it even a real firearm, or is it a replica? Third, and this is the one that every expert has flagged, the doorbell camera improvisation. This person walks up to the front door, appears to look to the left first, as if expecting a camera somewhere else, then notices the doorbell camera and appears surprised. Their first move is to try to cover it with their gloved hand. When that doesn't work, they step back, look around the yard, pull up a piece of shrubbery, and try to cover the camera with it. Former FBI agent Leasing described this as an irrational step. Josh Campbell, a former FBI agent and CNN correspondent, said that if the suspect had actually conducted surveillance on the home and seen a camera, they would have brought something to block it. The fact that they didn't tells us they weren't prepared for it. And fourth, the pace. Multiple experts noted that the suspect's movement showed no urgency. Former FBI Deputy Director Andrew McCabe described it as not particularly furtive or concerned. Former police detective Eric Drager noted the person walked around the porch without rushing, almost casually. That's not the behavior of someone executing a high-risk crime. That's someone who either doesn't understand the risk or doesn't care. So that's the amateur side. Now let's look at what went right, disturbingly right, about this operation. Nancy Guthrie was removed from her home in a quiet residential neighborhood in the middle of the night. No neighbor heard anything. No one saw a vehicle. No one reported a disturbance. An 84-year-old woman who can't walk 50 yards on her own was somehow extracted from her house, moved to a vehicle or another location, and disappeared without leaving behind a trace visible to the naked eye. Her pacemaker disconnected from her Apple Watch in the early morning hours. That takes a level of awareness about her health monitoring. The doorbell camera was physically disconnected. Someone knew it needed to be dealt with, even if the execution was sloppy. And then there's the roof camera we just discussed. Someone potentially set up surveillance on this property in advance. The ransom notes contained details that weren't publicly available at the time they were sent. They mentioned the Apple Watch still being in the house. They mentioned floodlights on the exterior of the property, floodlights that have since been removed by investigators. Someone had inside knowledge, or at least knowledge that went beyond what the public knew. And FBI Director Kash Patel confirmed that law enforcement is looking for multiple persons of interest. Not one. Multiple. Chris McDana, the homicide investigator who appeared on Law and Crime, laid out what I think is the most compelling version of this theory. He described a scenario where the person we see at the front door isn't the only one involved. What if, McDana suggested, the front door person was supposed to be a distraction or an entry point, while a second person came in through the back? What if the plan was for someone inside the house to open the front door from within? And the person at the doorbell camera had their moment of realization. The plan assumed there wouldn't be a camera or that someone else would have already dealt with it. And suddenly they're standing there on film trying to figure out what to do. That reframe changes everything. Because now you're not looking at one criminal mind with contradictory skill levels. You're looking at two. A planner, someone intelligent, methodical, potentially familiar with Nancy's routine in her home, who designed the operation, and an operator, someone recruited, hired, or coerced to be the one who shows up, takes the physical risk, and does the dirty work. The operator is expendable. The planner stays invisible. This pattern is well documented in kidnapping for ransom cases, especially in organized crime structures. The person who plans never shows their face. The person on camera is the lowest level participant, and the fact that the ransom notes went to media outlets instead of the family, that's a planner's decision. That's someone who wants public pressure, public attention, public leverage. A street-level criminal would call the family and demand a wire transfer. A planner goes to TMZ. Now I want to be clear. This is a theory. There is no public evidence confirming that two specific individuals coordinated this. But the behavioral contradictions in this case point strongly toward multiple actors with different roles and different competency levels. And if that's true, the person on the doorbell camera is the one investigators need to find first, because that person is the weakest link, and weak links talk. But if there is a planner behind this, the next question becomes critical. What is the real motive? Because the ransom notes tell a story that the more you examine it, the less it holds together. Let me lay out the ransom timeline for you and see if you notice what I noticed. Nancy Guthrie disappears in the early morning hours of February 1st. The next day, February 2nd, Cold TV, a CBS affiliate in Tucson, reports that it received a letter demanding payment for Nancy's release. CBS News reviewed the letter and said investigators took it seriously because it contained specific details about Nancy's home and what she was wearing the night she disappeared. The FBI asked the station not to disclose its contents publicly. The following day, February 3rd, TMZ reported that it also received a ransom note. This one demanded millions of dollars in Bitcoin, included a specific cryptocurrency address, and set a deadline. Then a second note arrived, setting a second deadline for February 9th, the following Monday at 5 p.m. Mountain Standard Time. And then, nothing. Both deadlines passed. The Guthrie family, guided by the FBI's Behavioral Analysis Unit, who wrote every word of their public responses, posted emotional videos saying they would pay. Savannah Guthrie stood with her siblings and said directly to whoever took her mother, quote, "This is very valuable to us and we will pay." But no payment was made. No further communication came from the sender. And crucially, no proof of life was ever provided. Now a third note showed up. This one sent to TMZ asking for just 1 Bitcoin. This one was widely dismissed. Even Law and Crime's host said it didn't pass the smell test. It had all the hallmarks of an opportunist jumping on the story. And then there was the man in Los Angeles who decided to insert himself into this case. He contacted Annie Guthrie via text message. He also reached out to the brother-in-law, and he made a 9-second phone call to an unidentified family member. He was arrested and charged. But as homicide investigator Chris McDana pointed out, why the brother-in-law? At the time this man made contact, the brother-in-law wasn't even on the public radar. So how did he know to contact him? And who was on the other end of that 9-second call? Those are questions investigators are still unwinding. But let's zoom out from the individual notes and look at the pattern. Because the pattern is where this theory lives. Legitimate kidnapping for ransom operations. Follow a playbook. The FBI has studied this extensively. Typically, the ransom demand goes directly to the family. It includes proof of life, a photo, a video, something that confirms the victim is alive and in the captor's possession. There are clear instructions and a mechanism for communication. The captor wants money. They create a channel to get it. Almost none of that happened here. The ransom notes went to media outlets, not the family. That's backwards. If you want money, you go to the people with money. If you want attention, you go to the press. No proof of life was provided. The family begged for it. Savannah said publicly, "We need confirmation that our mother is alive." Nothing came back. 2 deadlines were set and both passed without consequence. No escalation, no follow-up threat, no updated demand, just silence. Retired ATF agent Jim Kavanaugh raised a blunt counterpoint about the so-called insider details in the notes. He pointed out that anyone could find publicly available images of Nancy wearing an Apple Watch. There are photos from the Today Show that pop up immediately on a Google search. That's not insider knowledge. That's a Google search. So here's where the theory splits into 2 possibilities. Possibility A. The ransom notes were sent by the actual perpetrator, but not as a genuine demand for money. They were sent as a diversionary tactic, a way to make investigators and the public focus on a financial motive while the real motive, whatever it is, stays hidden. The notes went to media outlets because the perpetrator wanted to control the narrative, create noise, and direct attention away from the actual reason Nancy was taken. Possibility B. The ransom notes have nothing to do with whoever took Nancy. They're the work of one or more opportunists who saw the story, saw the family's wealth and fame, and decided to exploit the situation. This means the real motive for Nancy's abduction is still completely unknown. Either way, the silence after 2 deadlines is the most important data point, because people who take someone for money don't just go quiet. They escalate. They send proof. They apply pressure. The fact that none of that has happened either means the ransom demand was never real, or something went very wrong on the captor's end. And if the ransom isn't the real story, then we have to ask the hardest question in this case. The one that every investigator starts with, even if nobody wants to say it out loud. I want to handle this theory carefully, because this is the one that can easily be twisted into accusation if it's presented recklessly. And that's not what I do on this channel. What I do is present what's known, identify what doesn't add up, and let you, the audience, think critically about what the evidence suggests. That's all I'm going to do here. No accusations, no finger pointing, just the timeline and the questions it raises. Let's walk through it. Friday, January 31st. Nancy Guthrie goes to her daughter Annie's home for dinner. She Ubers there around 5:30 p.m. It's about a 10-minute drive. They have dinner. They play games. It's a family evening. Around 9:45 p.m., a family member drives Nancy home. The Pima County Sheriff confirmed this publicly, but has not identified which specific family member was the driver. He was asked directly during his very first press conference. He said the family drove her home. A reporter followed up, "Did they see her inside the house?" He answered yes. Her garage door opens at 9:48 p.m. It closes at 9:50 p.m. That's confirmed data from the garage door system. The doorbell camera captures the masked, armed suspect at approximately 2 a.m., roughly 4 hours later. Nancy is not reported missing until approximately noon on February 1st, around 14 hours after she was dropped off. Now let me explain why this timeline matters to investigators, because it's not about suspicion of the family. It's about a gap. Between 9:50 p.m., when the garage door closes, and 2 a.m., when the suspect appears on camera, there are 4 hours that have not been publicly accounted for. What happened during those 4 hours? Was Nancy asleep? Was she awake? Did she receive any calls? Did anyone else come to the house? Did anything else trigger the doorbell camera or any other sensor in the home before 2 a.m.? We don't know. And what we do know is that law enforcement has been intensely focused on reconstructing every minute of that window. Investigators have returned to Annie's home repeatedly. They've conducted searches, all consensual, meaning the family agreed without requiring a warrant. They've talked to Annie's neighbors, asking about doorbell cameras and surveillance footage. On one visit, investigators were seen leaving the home, carrying a bag, while wearing gloves. Annie and her husband are reportedly no longer staying at the house, which is understandable given the constant media presence and ongoing law enforcement activity. Now, there's also the matter of the garage door data. Homicide investigator Chris McDana raised a point that stuck with me. We know the garage door opened and closed when Nancy arrived home. That data exists. But when the family returned the next day, when they discovered Nancy was missing, there's a question about how they entered the house. If they went through the garage, there should be data showing that. If they went through the front door, they would have had to walk past the blood on the porch. If they went through another entrance, that raises its own questions. McDana framed it as an investigative anomaly, the kind of thing detectives have to reconcile. Not because it implies wrongdoing, but because every point of entry and exit has to be accounted for in a case like this. Now, I also need to tell you what happened when some media figures went further than the evidence supports. Former news journalist Ashley Banfield released a report on her YouTube channel that appeared to point the finger at a specific family member, Nancy's son-in-law. Within hours, the Pima County Sheriff's Department responded publicly and forcefully. They posted a statement saying, quote, "Detectives are working closely with the Guthrie family. While we appreciate the public's concern, the sharing of unverified accusations or false information is irresponsible and does not assist the investigation. No suspect or person of interest have been identified at this time." That pushback was immediate and deliberate. And it tells you something important. Law enforcement is protecting the integrity of this investigation. They are not going to let public speculation contaminate their work. So here's how I frame this theory. It is not that the family did something wrong. The evidence does not support that conclusion. The family has been described as fully cooperative. The searches have been consensual. The FBI and the sheriff have said nothing to implicate any family member. The theory is this. The timeline between 9:50 p.m. and 2 a.m. contains the key to understanding how the suspect knew Nancy was home, alone and vulnerable that night. Law enforcement is focused on Annie's home and that evening because they need to reconstruct every detail. Who knew Nancy was going to be alone that night? Who knew her schedule? Who might have seen or heard something during or after the drive home? The answer may not involve the family at all. It could be as simple as someone watching the house from a distance, waiting for the lights to go out. But the timeline gap is where the case cracks open. And investigators know that. Investigating the inner circle is standard procedure in every single missing person and abduction case in the country. It doesn't mean guilt. It means thoroughness. It means doing the job right. And in a case this high profile, with stakes this high, you cannot afford to leave any stone unturned. But there's one more theory we need to talk about, And honestly, it might be the most terrifying one of all. Because it asks the question, what if this wasn't random and it wasn't personal? What if Nancy Guthrie was chosen? Let me hit you with a number. Between June 2020 and June 2025, approximately 240,000 kidnappings or abductions were reported in the United States. Of those, women in their 80s, Nancy's age group, accounted for 646 cases. That's less than 0.2% of all victims. The largest group of victims were people in their 20s, making up nearly 30%. Nancy Guthrie is a statistical anomaly. Women her age are almost never abducted. It is, in the words of forensic anthropologist Jesse Goliath, something essentially unheard of. So the question becomes, why her? And when you look at the evidence through this lens, a pattern emerges that is deeply unsettling. Nancy lived alone in Catalina foothills, a quiet, secluded community about 6 miles north of Tucson. Homes are spread out across desert terrain. It's not the kind of neighborhood where someone would hear a scuffle or notice a vehicle in the middle of the night. Former FBI agent Catherine Schweet pointed out that it wouldn't be especially hard for someone to remove Nancy from her home and drive away undetected given that location. Nancy had a known, predictable routine. She attended church regularly. Her missed virtual service on February 1st was what triggered the missing person report. She had regular family dinners. She had regular help coming to her property, some pool cleaners, gardeners, service workers who would have seen her schedule, her habits, her living situation. And here's the detail that I keep coming back to. In November of the previous year, just about 2 months before she disappeared, Nancy was featured on The Today Show. The segment spotlighted her love of Tucson. It talked about how she moved there in the 1970s. It showed her community. It highlighted her connection to Savannah. It was a warm, loving segment, and it essentially broadcast Nancy's location, her routine, and her attachment to her home to a national audience. Now, that alone doesn't prove targeting, but combine it with everything else. Nancy lived alone. She had mobility issues. She needed daily medication. She was connected to one of the wealthiest and most famous families in television news. And her home, while comfortable, was not a fortress. It was in a quiet area with limited surveillance coverage and spread out neighbors. That's a profile. Whether someone built that profile from TV appearances, from internet research, from physically observing the property, or from having direct access through service work, the result is the same. Nancy Guthrie checked every box that a predator looks for in a target. According to Fox News, hired help connected to Nancy's property has already been asked to provide DNA swabs. That tells you investigators are seriously examining who had access to her home and her life on a regular basis. Retired FBI Special Agent Gregory Vecchi said it clearly. This is definitely targeted and planned. There seems to be a lot of pre-operational planning. He noted that the suspect seemed to know the area and the house well enough to go straight toward the camera. That's not the behavior of a stranger approaching a random house for the first time. So the theory is this. Nancy wasn't chosen randomly. She was identified either because of her connection to Savannah and the financial opportunity that represents, or because someone in her daily orbit recognized her vulnerability and decided to exploit it. The targeting could have happened through media exposure, through physical surveillance, through professional access to her home, or through some combination of all three. And here's the darkest dimension of this theory. If someone targeted Nancy specifically, they almost certainly knew about her medical needs. The sheriff has said publicly that her daily medication is essential and that going without it could be fatal. That means one of two things. Either the captor planned for this and is managing her medication, which would indicate a sophisticated long-term operation, or they didn't plan for it, and time is running out. Every day that passes makes this more urgent. So here's where we are. 6 theories. And honestly, evidence supports parts of all of them. That's what makes this case unlike almost anything we've seen. The burglary gone wrong theory explains the amateur behavior at the door, like the wrong holster, the oversized gloves, the bush ripped from the yard to cover the camera. It explains why the suspect looked surprised. It explains the delayed ransom note. The roof camera theory explains the surveillance. It explains how someone knew Nancy's schedule, her movements, her vulnerability. It suggests planning that stretches back days or weeks before February 1st. The two-brain theory explains why both can be true at the same time. A smart planner, a sloppy operator, two different people with two different skill levels. One designs the operation, the other shows up at the door. The ransom smokescreen theory explains the silence. 2 deadlines passed with no follow-up, no proof of life, no escalation. Notes sent to the press instead of the family. Either the ransom isn't real, or something has gone very wrong on the other side. The timeline gap explains law enforcement's focus. Those 4 hours between the garage door closing and the suspect appearing on camera hold the key. Whoever planned this knew Nancy was alone that night, and the answer to how they knew lies somewhere in that window. And the targeted stranger theory explains how someone, this apparently incompetent, at the front door still managed to successfully remove an 84-year-old woman from a home in a quiet community without leaving behind a witness or a visible trace. 6 theories, 6 contradictions, and they all end the same way, with someone who is keeping a secret. Nancy Guthrie has been missing for over 12 days now. She is 84 years old. She needs medication daily. Without it, her life is in danger. The FBI is offering a $100,000 reward for information leading to Nancy's location or the arrest and conviction of anyone involved in her disappearance. If you know anything at all, you can contact the FBI at 1-800-CALL-FBI. That's 1-800-22-55324. You can also go to tips.fbi.gov, or you can contact the Pima County Sheriff's Department at 5203514900. You can remain anonymous, but you cannot remain silent, not on this one. Somewhere out there, someone knows what happened to Nancy Guthrie. And if you've watched this far, if you followed the evidence, the theories, the contradictions, you know that this case doesn't end until that person speaks up. If this video helped you understand this case better, subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications. We are following this case, and we will update you as new developments break. Stay safe. And Nancy, if by some miracle you can hear this, your family hasn't stopped fighting. And neither will we.